Hello, everybody. I am so sorry for that delay. Sometimes whenever Streamlabs ends one stream, it doesn't want to start another one until I have cleared up all that good stuff. So, as I discussed in my previous stream, not even 5 minutes ago, I think whenever I'm doing Insomnia streams, I'm gonna try doing some live readings. I really want to. I've wanted to kind of get into voice acting before. I'm not super great at it. I apologize in advance, but I've been told I have a great reading voice. So that being said, the book that we're going to be looking at today is because in order to avoid copyright infringement by reading other people's books, we'll be reading my own. So this is Behemoth. Way, way back in 2012. My very first original novel that I ever wrote was called Trinity Wars Behemoth because it was meant to be book one of three. Um, Basically, the book's about kind of mythology and folklore and stuff of that nature. And frankly, it was terrible. I'm actually kind of embarrassed by my first draft of it. At the time, I didn't have enough money to pay an editor, so it was horribly written, and I was still so proud of it that I sent a copy to my favorite childhood author, and I have never been more embarrassed to do something so stupid in my entire life. I never got a message back or anything like that, but still, it kind of like threw me off by how bad it was whenever I tried to reread it. So, a few years back, circa 2016, I decided to rewrite it, and I feel that it is much better written now, so I am actually not ashamed to read it to you guys. Um, it still hasn't been completely edited, so there's going to be some rough patches in it, but I promise you it is a hell of a lot better than the original publication. Uh, so, to my dedication, I dedicated it to the readers of my fan fiction because without them, I would not have had the support necessary to have completed this book. And then I have my tagline there, which is how I used to sign all of my emails, which is I wish you all the best of luck in life and literature, which was something that was said to me by a common reviewer, and it stuck to me so much that I decided to use that myself. So, without further ado, I'll go ahead and start reading. So, Chapter 1. Standing at the bow of the Silver Seahorse, I took a deep whiff of the musty sea air. I propped my leg up like a true captain and enjoyed the feeling of salty mist that sprayed up from every wave that battered against the hull. Not to be cheesy, but I felt like the king of the world. At least I did, until my boat came to a sudden halt, nearly sending me overboard. Had I snagged a reef? I was certain there wasn't one here before. The sonar hadn't shown anything the last time I checked either. My fishing nets had been trawling for treasures along the seabed, but with no luck. Returning to the bridge, I pulled the throttle lever to full stop before manipulating the net controls to draw them in. With a tired groan, the winch began to bring in the catch. Definitely not a reef. Within the mesh, tangled in kelp and seaweed, I could see a large construct that looked familiar. Curious, I set it on the deck so I could take a closer look. As the nets unfurled around it, the shape became recognizable as a carousel. It was tiny, the kind that you sometimes see outside of supermarkets offering rides for a quarter, but this one looked ancient. In a daze, I walked closer to my strange catch. My hands worked to remove the kelp and grime from the animals on the track. Most were decrepit, their features had been worn off or broken to the point that they were simply hunks of wood. Only one of the creatures could still be identified, the horse. Its body was painted a pitch black that was dark enough to make a shadow jealous. Even though it had no saddle or reins, it still had a bit and bridle lodged in its jaws. Bridle. I think it's pronounced bridle. Pretty sure it's pronounced bridle. I should know this. I have horses. Uh, the metal bands that connected the two were stamped with strange symbols I'd never seen before in all of my quote unquote hunts. Despite the oddities, there was a sense of familiarity welling up in my chest at the sight of the creature. As I moved to inspect it from another angle, I found my attention caught by its eyes. I hadn't noticed it before, but they were far too realistic to be glass reproductions. The Mustang's gaze was filled with fear, and its face was twisted into a grotesque expression. It was as if someone froze the terrified beast in its tracks, doomed forever to be placed on a children's ride. Hesitantly, my hand went out to brush against its bridle. It was silly, but I wanted to at least try to give it some comfort. The instant I made contact, the horse lunged at me, snapping its jaws just inches from my face. The once flat wooden teeth grew into gnashing daggers, eager to rip into my flesh. I barely managed to scramble away in time. Now resting against the bridge, I could do nothing but stare in horror as it squirmed on its pole. With one last powerful pull, it snapped the pole to free itself and let out a monstrous whinny. Above me, the skies grew ominous. In less time than it took to blink, the blue had been replaced with the gray of an encroaching hurricane. The horse stood fully now, its head held up with pride. The fear in its gaze was replaced with rage, and all of it was directed at me. What had I done to warrant this? Its hooves clopped against the deck as it stalked me. My legs flailed wildly as I tried to phase through the wall behind me. No, please, I begged for my life, as if one request could rid me of its presence. Still, it prowled ever closer as lightning struck around us, filling the air with explosive thunder. It was hard to miss just how screwed I was. There was nowhere left to run, and even if I could, the boat wasn't large enough to let me hide from the creature. Now it was only a few meters away from me, bent low to the ground in preparation for the kill. Before it pounced, an unexpected force capsized the boat, flinging both of us into the water. Even though I was a decently strong swimmer, the turbulent currents sapped all of my energy just to escape being tangled in my own nets. With adrenaline pumping through my veins, my body quickly got its priorities straight. Surface, air, breathe, land, safety. My head whipped around in desperation, only to find the horizon completely empty. Where was the land? It was there just a moment ago. I scrambled to get onto the bottom of my capsized vessel. Staying in the water wouldn't help me one bit. There was no sign of the horse. Did it drown? A bone-slicing wind tore through my soaked clothing. At this rate, I'd freeze to death. I pulled my legs up to my chest, holding them close. It didn't stop the cold, but it was the best I could do if I wanted to survive. Around me, the waves swelled and crashed, yet somehow my ship remained completely still. Was this how I would die? Between the elements or starvation, I didn't know which I'd prefer. With no other choice, I waited for my fate to be decided. And then there was a silhouette, far in the distance. The surf would rise, blocking my view before falling once more. Each time, the shape moved closer to me. My eyes strained to make out the identity of the figure. It seemed too small to be the horse, but that did little to comfort me. Soon it was close enough to identify. She was a young woman, standing above the chop and staring straight at me. Not treading water, but truly standing on the turbulent waves as if it were a solid ground. Her dress looked ancient. It appeared to be dyed a deep blue with a golden sash around the waist, and tatters that fluttered in the storm. Her hair was short and black, tousled by the wind, and yet she stayed eerily serene in the face of it all. As her sandaled feet moved gracefully, one in front of the other, I found myself in complete awe. From beneath her dark bangs, her beautiful emerald green eyes seemed to shimmer in the dimness of the storm, as a soft smile came to her lips. She was strikingly radiant. Her pale skin contrasted with her beautiful rose lips and the dark curls that framed her face. Our eyes locked, and for a moment I felt breathless. My heart was pounding fiercely in my chest as we continued to share our gaze, and I found myself wondering if this was what people meant by love at first sight. When the woman was just 10 feet from my vessel, she beckoned me closer to her, and without a thought I complied. I moved towards her, unable to look away until lightning struck between the two of us. The resulting burst flung me back against the hull, blinking spots from my eyes. An object slammed into my chest, shoving me into the water and dragging me down. Once my vision returned, I saw not the beautiful woman, but the horrible beast that I'd come to fear. My fingers reached out for the surface, as if touching the air would allow me to breathe again. To my surprise, the creature released me. Hope swelled in my chest, but it was only in vain. The monster's fangs engulfed my face, sending me into an abrupt and final blackness. With a cry of shock, I sat up abruptly in my bed to be greeted by the image of a different row of sharp teeth on the far wall. I let out a breath of relief, placing my hand over my chest to still my racing heart. I'd had the same nightmare every day for the last week, and it was all because of that stupid horse. "Good morning, Nessie," I murmured to the portrait, swinging my legs over the edge of my bed to begin my daily routine. As I scrubbed my teeth lazily, I looked at myself in the mirror to see that I'd been crying in my sleep again. Great. It may seem odd that I was comforted by the sight of a renowned monster when I awaken, but I am what one would call a cryptozoology enthusiast. To put it in layman's terms, I'm a nut job with a passion for seeking out mythical creatures. Unicorns, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness monsters. Those were just a few of my targets. However, monster hunting, as my best friend Sammy would say, doesn't pay the bills. Luckily, she was kind enough to net me a job at the amusement park she managed. Maintenance wasn't a fabulous job, but it covered rent, and there was worse work to do in Galveston. As I tugged on my work polo, I tried to reflect back on the weird dream. The horse was an easy mystery to solve. About a month ago, the park got a new carousel that one of the board members' kids had assembled from junk they had laying around. One of those pieces of junk was the aforementioned stupid horse. I couldn't explain it, but every time I walked past it, it gave me goosebumps. That's when the nightmare started. The girl, however, was a complete enigma. I remember reading somewhere that the human mind isn't capable of coming up with faces for dreams, but that it had to pull them from your memory because of the complexity of the features, or something scientific like that. But I couldn't remember ever meeting that woman, or even passing her on the street. I was certain if I had, I'd have noticed those eyes. They were so beautiful and hypnotic, there's no way I could have forgotten them. Ensuring I was completely set, I locked my door behind me. As I did every day, I elected to get my breakfast of choice from a vendor along the seawall. "Hey, Frank," I greeted sleepily as I reached for my wallet. One dog. "Here, Ishmael, on the house," he offered with a gesture-like grin. Taking it from him, my gaze must have reflected my confusion, because he just let out a hearty laugh. "Look, kid, you come to my stand every single day. You're my most loyal customer. Since you're basically what's keeping me afloat, I figure I can let you have a free hot dog. Besides, you look like hell. Rough night?" "You could say that," I agreed before glancing down at my watch. "Ah, crap, I'm running late. Thanks, Frank. See you tomorrow." "Later," he waved. As I ran down the sidewalk, it wasn't long before I had reached the bottom of the massive pier that the theme park was built on. Having shoveled my hot dog down mid-run, I attempted to brush the crumbs from my shirt and straighten my composure before moving towards the mob of people that had assembled in front of the gates. This was, by far, the worst part of my job. The park didn't open for another half hour. Didn't people have anything better to do with their time at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning? Making my way through the throng, I counted the steps until I was safely inside the employee-only section. As if on cue, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder, just before my hand reached the doorknob. Putting on the best fake smile I could muster, I turned to see an older woman with a hooked beak of a nose and a pair of horn-rimmed glasses. In her hand was a much smaller one, belonging to a snot-nosed child who stared off into space. "Excuse me, Mr. Maintenance," she squawked, having read the patch on my shirt, "but my grandson and I have been waiting for the park to open for the last 30 minutes. When do you intend to open the gates?" Her shrill voice was grating, but even still the smile never faded from my face. "Well, ma'am, the park opens at 8:30 a.m. and it is presently 8 o'clock, I recited. "Come 8:30, we'll be happy to open the gates so you and your grandson can enjoy the wonderful exhibits we have to offer." She let out an irritated huff as the boy wiped his nose with the back of his arm. "But just look at all these people. Why don't you just open the gates now and let us in early?" "Because then you'd do this all the time." "Sorry, ma'am, but it's against the park's regulations. We use the time before opening to ensure everything is safe and working properly. Here at Funland, we want our customers to enjoy their experience without worry. Now, if you'll excuse me—" "You are not excused," she snapped. The smile I wore quickly fell from my face as she continued to screech in my face. I should probably remove that second in my face. I fastened my... "If it's so unsafe, then why do you get to go in, huh? If you don't open these gates now, I'm going to get my lawyer's son to come down here and sue..." "Ma'am," I interrupted icily, the cheerful tone of my voice now gone. The park opens at 8:30. It opened at 8:30 yesterday. It'll open at 8:30 tomorrow. A year from now, when all of your hair has fallen out, the park will still open at 8:30. Now, as much as I'd love to address your vital concerns, I need to go outside and make sure the rides that you and your dear grandson ride on don't send you plummeting to the ground to splatter your brains against the boardwalk. The park opens shortly. Have a nice day. As she stood there completely stunned, I quickly slipped inside the door before shutting it snugly behind me. Just as I was finally calming down, she began pounding on the door, demanding to speak to my manager. I let out a groan of frustration as I walked to the punch clock. Reaching for my time card, I froze, unable to find it. Late again, I see, a familiar voice tisked behind me. Wheeling about, I came face to face with Sam, my best friend and my boss. She was an attractive girl. Light brown skin, seemed to be constantly tanned, long, flowing red hair that matched her fiery personality, and a body that most couldn't help but drool over. I once asked her parents where they originated from, but despite her looking more Middle Eastern, they swore they'd originally come from Ireland. After they passed away in a car accident, she got her GED and moved down here to Galveston to set up shop. Ishmael, 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 what am I going to do with you? This is your third time late this month, you know. Company policy dictates that I have to fire you. But wait, what's this? Reaching into her shirt pocket, she plucked out the beige piece of paper before slipping into mine. Why, it seems as if someone punched you in 5 minutes earlier by mistake. Aren't you lucky? Morning, Sammy, I sighed, taking the card and slipping it into the correct spot. Out of everyone we knew, I was the only person who ever called her Sammy, and even I didn't have the courage to call her Samantha. And thanks for saving me. Again. So what was it that held you up this time, Ishmael? Flying dinosaurs? Maybe there was a dragon? Ooh, an invisible dragon. I scoffed. Sam never really supported my monster hunting hobby. I think she was just too much of a skeptic. Hilarious. No, I was held up by the Crypt Creeper and her spawn, Pestilence. Don't worry, I got rid of her. Speaking of which, if a complaint is filed against Mr. Maintenance, it wasn't me. Please, please tell me you didn't call her the Crypt Keeper to her face, Sam begged, the color draining from her cheeks. It was nice to see her teased instead of teasing me for once. Yeah, just do what you always do, Sam. Tell them you'll handle it, and we'll laugh about it when we go for drinks later. This is serious, Ishmael, she argued. I can't keep covering for you. I could lose my job. Her eyes grew wide as anxiety began to set in. I can't lose my job. If I lose my job, I can't pay rent, and if I can't pay rent, then... I stopped her by putting my hands on her shoulders. The moment I touched her, she snapped out of it, staring into my eyes. Breathe. All I did was tell her she's going bald, and then explain my job in gory detail. I'm not going to let you lose your job. Just trust me. Relax, okay? Closing her honey-colored eyes, she took a deep breath. Her shoulders rose and fell under my hands before she nodded her head. She flashed me a slight smile to assure me she was calm again. Fine. I trust you. By the way, I had Eric run some diagnostics on the rides. Everything is functioning properly, but knowing him, he's probably rigged the test of strength machine so he can show off to the girls who come by. Care to take a whack at it? I rolled my eyes. Yeah, she was okay. Sam, your puns are terrible, I griped. I'll take a look, but please try to get a better sense of humor. Hitting me playfully with her clipboard, she flashed me a grin. Shut up, jerk. Make me jerk. I teased back before looking at my watch again. 5 minutes until opening. I hoped that old crone wouldn't see me while I was repairing the game that Eric kept breaking. Sure enough, just as Sammy had predicted, he had wedged a wooden block into the mechanism to make the weight fly higher, and the pad was hit. Worse, when I removed it, I found out the moron stretched the spring, meaning it had to be replaced. As I tinkered away, people filtered into the park, going off to try to be the first in line to their favorite rides. After another 20 minutes of work, I could even hear Eric bragging to some young girls who stopped by. Oh yeah, I like to test the machine every now and then, but the park says I can't anymore because I'm too strong. When I hit it, the thing breaks, so now I have to get maintenance to check it and do repairs for me. The girls giggled in response, but somehow I suspected they were laughing at the frail young man rather than flirting with him. My radio buzzed for a moment before Sam's voice came on. Ishmael, can you go check on the speeder for me, please? I don't like how those clouds are looking, and I want to make sure the boat's tied down. Eric, a kid threw up on the tilt-a-whirl steps. I need you to grab a mop and clean it up, please. The girls began to laugh uproariously now as I gathered my tools. Squeezing the button on my radio, I responded. Sure thing, Sammy. On my way now. Normally, I rushed to any assignments I was given. The faster I was done with my maintenance, the faster I could go help Sammy with her office work. Much more fun than baking in the hot sun. However, I came to a slow walk as I approached the carousel from my nightmares. Sure enough, that freaky horse was there, along with the rest of its friends. I could feel its eyes on me as I passed. I wanted to close my eyes so I couldn't see it, but at the same time I didn't trust it enough to look away. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was a wooden horse. It wasn't a monster. It couldn't come to life and attack me. It was just a stupid, creepy statue that someone turned into a ride, no different from any other attraction. Even still, I was grateful that the carousel hadn't broken down yet. The further I stayed away from it, the better. Ishmael, screw the boat, Sammy shouted through the radio. Doppler just picked up a water funnel and it's heading our way. We need to evacuate. No way. The clouds had started to form a few hours ago. There was nothing in the news about there being a major storm. Impossible or not, however, whenever I turned to look out over the pier, the radio nearly fell from my hands. The cyclone was already starting to whip the Gulf into a frenzy, and it was bearing down on us. Roger, Sammy, I replied hastily, tucking the walkie-talkie back under my belt. I started running this way and that, directing people to get off the pier to safety. It didn't take long before I came to the last few people. It was the old woman and her grandson, and they were with the Ferris wheel operator. Was this woman seriously arguing with him in the middle of a storm? Umbrellas that had covered tables were being blown away by the fierce winds as I ran up the steps. You need to go, now, I instructed her, taking her by the arm and moving to pull her away. I can't leave, she wailed. He's trapped. The kid threw his drink at the console. The electronic locks won't open, the attendant explained, trying to pull it open. Damn it. Take her, get off the pier. Make sure you pick up any stragglers along the way. I'll get the kid out. He nodded, taking the sobbing woman and dragging her after him towards the exit. Turning back towards the doors, I began fishing around in my toolkit for my screwdriver. Inside the gondola, the boy started to cry. Easy, buddy, I assured him, jamming the screwdriver into the hinge of the door. I'm gonna get you out, but I need you to keep calm for me. What's your name? To be honest, I had no idea what I was doing talking to this kid. I'd seen a few hostage negotiation movies, and they always tried to keep them calm by asking them questions. Chumley. Chumley? I repeated skeptically before prying off the first hinge. He nodded. Poor kid, I muttered under my breath. Getting the second hinge off, I could now see the dark shapes of fish being sucked into the watery vortex. I double-timed my already fast-paced work. Okay, listen up, Chumley. Once I get this door off, you and I are going to have a race. You're going to run as fast as you can to the seawall, and don't stop for anything, no matter how tired you are. Got it? Yes, sir, he blubbered just as the final hinge broke free. Grabbing the door, I ripped it aside before quickly ushering him out of the gondola. Just as I'd instructed, he took off like a shot, running as fast as he possibly could in order to escape the oncoming storm. I quickly turned to run after him, but with a loud rumble, the support pillars beneath my section of the pier suddenly collapsed, sending me sliding down the steep planks towards the water. I dug my hands and feet in as hard as I could, scraping up my fingers until I finally managed to find perch. Are you okay? Chumley asked, peering over the edge. God, this kid was tense. Run! I barked. If you're still there when I get to the top, I'm going to throw you off the pier. Got it? It may have been a bit menacing, but the last thing I wanted was the death of some kid on my hands. Sure enough, he vanished from view as I began to climb the makeshift rungs. There was no time for me to rest. I had to get out of this storm. With another crunch, the second set of supports collapsed. With a groan, the Ferris wheel broke from its bearings and rolled past me into the water. I couldn't tell if I was fortunate it had missed or unlucky that I was stuck out here in the first place. I pressed myself tightly against the wood as objects rained down around me to avoid getting beamed by the falling attractions. It was then that from the depths of the bay, an enormous orange tentacle erupted upwards like a whip. In the blink of an eye, it snapped around my ankle, sinking jagged barbs into my flesh. It took all of my concentration not to scream from the pain. When I turned to see what had grabbed me, the fear I'd felt from the storm multiplied 100-fold. Beneath the murky waves, I could see the tentacle connected to a shadow that was larger than any creature I'd ever seen. It was as if the entire section of beach beneath the pier was now alive and set to attack. As the grip of the monster's arm tightened around my leg, I drew my pocket knife and began hacking away at it with one hand, sending spurts of cobalt blue blood into the air in my frenzy. I'd made little progress when, with a bubbling roar from the creature's beak, it withdrew its tentacle. Scrambling as fast as I could towards the upper dock, a wave of relief washed over me when my hand gripped the top. I was going to make it. I'd get to shore and I'd call for help. Animal control, the police, hell, the whole damned military would be needed to help destroy this thing. Fate, however, had other plans. Just as I peered over the ledge, my eyes met with the carousel horse that haunted my sleep. It was racing towards me, somehow having managed to break from its ride. Before I could even process my misfortune, the wooden creature slammed in my chest, knocking me from the only hope I had for survival. As I hurtled the long distance down towards the chop, my knife went careening into the waves. In the clouded depths, I witnessed the undersea monster crumple the Ferris wheel like a paper ball. I braced myself for impact, but it did little for me when my body slammed against the waves. The water forced the air from my lungs, instead giving me a mouthful of brine. In my head, billions of thoughts were racing back and forth, searching desperately for a way to survive. I couldn't give up yet. I broke the surface, throat burning from the salty water I'd managed to cough out. Regaining my bearings, I looked down to see if I could find the creature. Nearly 100 feet beneath me, a golden circle exposed itself, easily as large as a house. In the center, a black slit focused on me, and it was then that a gut-wrenching realization struck me. This was its eye. For the first time in my life, I felt the truest fear imaginable. Something deep within my hindbrain, left there purely by evolutionary instinct, spoke to me. It only had one word: run. I swam madly for the pier, praying that against all odds I'd be able to outswim the abomination. I didn't make it far. The thing plucked me from the surface with the same amount of effort that one would use to remove a piece of lint from their shirt. Halfway down, its grip slipped. I wouldn't get another chance. Just as I made it back to the surface, he tugged me back under. Then, just like last time, released me halfway. After the third time, I realized that it was just toying with me. In my addled mind, I could have sworn I even heard it cackling through the beak that snapped open and shut beneath me. This was no mindless animal. This thing had malice, sadism. The best word for it was indeed monster. I couldn't even appreciate the irony that it was the first one I'd ever discovered. How many people had fallen prey to this thing? Did they keep struggling until he grew bored, or did they just give up? I would not fall into the latter category. I kicked my legs as hard as I could when he freed me again. A dark shape hovered above me. Something was floating there. I hurled myself over the object, causing it to bob and roll over in the water. My stomach dropped. My mind snapped. I laughed so hard that I started crying. The object was that stupid, infernal horse. From one fear to another. Please let this be another nightmare. When the hysteria passed, my situation struck me again. Screw my imaginary fears. There was a very real threat beneath me, and as much as I didn't like it, this horse was my best hope for survival. Please, I begged, help me. The monster dragged me under again. I reached for my savior, praying to it for help. When my fingers touched metal, they curled around it, pulling it close. My other arm wrapped around its neck, hugging it close as if it were my only friend. Still, it was hopeless. The horse simply followed after me under the waves. This was it. The monster wasn't letting me go anymore. I was dead, once and for all. As I stared into what had once been my worst fears, my entire life flashed before my eyes. My dreams, my memories, my hopes and fears, all began to flicker in my head like a movie, until they were shattered by the realization that the horse had blinked. Wonderful. Now I was hallucinating moments before my death, unable to even enjoy my reminiscing because of this stupid horse. Then it blinked again, the bridle in my grip beginning to grow hot. A snort from its nostrils sent a cluster of warm bubbles into my face. It was alive. Jesus Christ, the horse was alive. I tried to release it, the fear of my nightmares overtaking me, but I could not pull my arm away. The creature's fur beneath my flesh was no longer polished wood, but a smooth and sticky substance that felt even wetter than the water itself. Don't worry, Ishmael. You're safe now. A feminine voice echoed in my mind just as the last of my air floated to the surface of the water. The horse began to pull. Somehow it dragged me back to the surface, against the monster's will, until the enormous octopus was forced to release me. I say forced because the bellowing roar from the depths indicated it was not happy that something had interrupted its fun. My savior rose its head from the waves, climbing to stand on top of them. Relative safety embraced me like a warm blanket. I was alive. With a fierce flick of its neck, the horse tossed me into the air like a rag doll. When I came back down, I somehow landed perfectly on its back. Like a shot, it took off across the surface, faster than any jet boat. Tentacles burst from beneath us, trying to grab the slippery creature with no success. I leaned forward, gripping the horse around its neck to prevent it falling off, but where I'd touched it, I found myself firmly adhered by the substance oozing from its flesh. Just what was this thing? Its hooves kicked up a fine spray behind us as it darted this way and that. The monster couldn't catch us. It was like watching a child trying to catch a hummingbird with its bare hands. The horse raced parallel with the beach before finally making a sharp U-turn. My body disconnected from its back and the momentum sent me flying. Instead of water, I hit soft sand some 20 yards away. The horse's eyes fixated on me just before the voice came back again. Rest there. I'll be back for you. In the meantime, I'll handle Luska. Unable to respond vocally, I just nodded my head. As the tentacles stretched towards the surface again, the horse dove head-on towards them. What I thought was its fastest speed before was nothing by comparison as it tore through the water in a blur. It was moving so fast that my eyes wouldn't have been able to track it were it not for the silvery trail left in its wake. All of the dirt and sediment that was in Galveston's Bay was ripped aside from the water as my rescuer swirled around the monster that the voice had called Luska. Able to see the now crystal clear waves, every so often I'd get a glimpse of the jet black horse striking hard into the octopus' gelatinous body. Its hooves tore at its flesh to fill the water around it with murky blue clouds before moving elsewhere. Luska's flailing about in an attempt to defend itself caused large waves to rise and fall beneath me. Swells at least 10 feet high obscured my view. The adrenaline began to wear off, followed by immense exhaustion. With no choice but to trust the voice, I collapsed back onto the beach. I stared up at the storm clouds above me. A burst of light exploded from behind them, just as my eyes closed. Never before had the sand seemed like such a nice place to take a nap. All right, on to chapter 2. When I regained my senses, cognizance came with a horrible headache. The dull throbbing felt like a jackhammer striking repeatedly against the inside of my skull. How much time had passed? I couldn't tell. My eyes opened to find that the beach was gone. There were no storm clouds above me. Instead, I was staring at my ceiling. I gave a groan, sitting up to find that I was indeed back in my room. As I stood up from my bed, I felt a bit of a draft and realized that I was unclothed. Save my underwear, my uniform was folded neatly on my dresser. As my hand rested on the khakis, I was surprised to find them clean and warm. Whoever changed me must have washed and dried them. As I slipped them on, the memories from the events that had transpired raced through my mind. Luska, the horse, the freak storm, it all sent me reeling. Sorry, whenever I read a lot, it makes my throat kind of dry. Maybe I was dead. If so, was this my version of heaven? I finished getting dressed before opening the door to my room to hear the sound of running water, accompanied by the familiar clink of ceramic against ceramic. Someone was doing my dishes? Hello? I called, bracing myself for what may be in my weird idea of paradise. Immediately, the sound stopped, and the sound of excited footsteps echoed towards me. Before I could react, Sammy appeared around the corner, full sprint. Ishmael, you're awake! She cried, pouncing on me and hugging me tightly. You scared me, you big jerk! The warmth of her body against mine pulled me back to reality. Blood was still coursing through my body. My heartbeat was proof enough that I was still alive. What had saved me? Sam continued blabbering as I stood there stunned. I found you washed up on the beach, and then you wouldn't wake up, and I wanted to take you to the doctor, but I panicked, and I brought you home instead, and... My body finally responded to my brain. I wrapped my arms around her, returning her hug with one of my own. As soon as I hugged her, she fell quiet, save for the sound of her soft cries. It's okay, Sammy, I whispered in her ear before letting her go and clearing my throat. I'm okay. Really. What happened to the monster? Did it come back? Monster? What are you talking about? I looked at her in bewilderment. How could she have missed it? The giant octopus. It was the one who destroyed the pier and tried to kill me. I know the horse fought it off, but there was no way it could have sent it running. It was huge, Sammy. I've never seen something so big in my entire life. Reaching up, Sam placed the back of her hand beneath my dark bangs, her other checking her own forehead for comparison. Ishmael, you're burning up. I think you must have had some crazy fever dream. The storm knocked the pillars out from under the pier, and you were on it when it fell. There wasn't a monster, and the carousel's probably with the rest of the pier at the bottom of the gulf. Oh, hold on, I'll get you something for that fever. Turning away from me, she stood on her toes to rummage through my cabinets for medicine as I tried to recollect what happened. I was certain that it wasn't a dream. The pain I still felt in my ankle was testimony to that. That's it. There was the proof I needed. I have proof. He grabbed my ankle. Look. I tugged up my pants leg, only to reveal that the punctures from Luska's barbs were no longer there. Not even a hint of blood. Okay, now I'm really worried, Ishmael. We need to get you to a hospital so they can check your head. Stupid, stupid Sam. You should have brought him there first. What if he has a concussion? I'm not imagining this. I swear it happened. Didn't it? I fell quiet, searching through my memories, but unable to find what had happened. When I realized Sam was still staring at me with concern, I tried to joke it off. Besides, if anyone needs their head checked, I'd say it'd be you. Talking to yourself isn't normal behavior. The beautiful redhead gave a sigh of relief. You're lucky I'd like you, or I'd have half a mind to knock you out again and drag you there anyway, she grumbled. Giving me the medicine, she went back to the kitchen and picked up a can of soda she'd left on the cabinet. There's something else bothering you, I observed. She'd always been very particular about her figure. If she was downing sugar, it was an attempt at finding comfort. What do you mean? She asked, taking a sip before grimacing and quickly setting it back down. It's true what they say. When you give up soda, it's hard to acquire the taste again. You always go for sugar when you're upset, and I have a feeling that me being up and about isn't enough to help. God, I hate it when you read me like that. Crossing my arms over my chest expectantly, she caved in. I got a call from corporate shortly after I brought you back. They saw the damage on the news and decided that the pier was not successful enough to warrant rebuilding. In short, we've been more or less terminated without severance. She was trembling now as she turned her back to me. I could hear her sniffling as she tried to hide her tears. I don't know what I'm going to do, she choked. I don't have a degree like you, Ishmael. That pier was my life, and now I've got nothing. No one's going to hire a girl with a GED whose only experience is working at a stupid theme park. Hey, hey, I said, turning her to face me. Look at me, Sammy. As I stared into the golden honey-colored pools and she stared right back into my hazel ones, I slowly and carefully enunciated what I had to say. You're going to be just fine. We will get through this, understand? We're safe. We're alive. That's all that matters right now. Her head bobbed up and down, bringing a smile to my face. I let go of her shoulders, satisfied that she had calmed herself. So, she stammered, what do you plan on doing? To be honest, despite my pep talk, I had no clue. I always felt that I had a pretty sweet setup there at the pier. I'd planned to work there for the rest of my life and continue cryptid hunting in my spare time. Now that the pier was gone, my comfortable lifestyle was out the window. No idea, I admitted before quickly adding, but like I said, we'll get through this. First, let's enjoy some time off for a change. Then we can discuss plans. Baby steps, right? Right, she answered half-heartedly. Just as I was about to try to soothe her concerns again, a resounding knock echoed through my door. Did you invite someone over? I asked. She shook her head. Walking to the door, I placed my eye up to the peephole. Standing on my doorstep was a man that looked like some sort of James Bond villain. He was an older man, his pale face wrinkled with age. He was dressed from head to toe in an all-black business suit, complete with a button-down and a 1950s-style fedora perched on his head. In his right hand he held a stiff wooden cane, also black. Its tip was carved into the fearsome image of a dog mid-snarl. The only splash of color on his person was the bright red necktie he wore, though the oddest detail of the man's ensemble was the eye patch he wore over his right eye. Raising his cane, he tapped it once more against the door before calling out, "Mr. Job, are you present?" He was Irish, judging by his accent. I'm terrible at accents. Reaching up, I slid back the chain and opened the door. "I'm Mr. Job," I greeted. "Can I help you?" "Ah, good day to you, sir. I was wondering if you could allow me inside, and I wish to discuss something with you in regards to your accident." Just as I was about to reply, his eyes went over my shoulder to fall upon Sam behind me. "Ah, you have a guest. My apologies. Allow me to give you my card. I can come back later if you like." "That's not necessary," I replied, holding the door open for him. "Please, come on in. Have a seat. Can I take your cane and hat?" "Shillelagh." "Sorry?" "It's not a cane. It's a shillelagh. A symbol from my home country, see? Traditionally, it was made out of blackthorn, lacquered in a chimney with whatever grease we had on hand. In olden times, they were used to settle disputes amongst gentlemen in a more refined way." I don't know why I'm going Australian. I feel like I have to channel Jacksepticeye here. Just like, top of the morning to you, lads and lassies. In olden times, they were used to settle disputes amongst gentlemen in a more refined way, despite that fighting with them typically ends with one's skull caved in. He must have spotted my confused expression, because he just gave a chuckle before tapping it thoughtfully against the ground. But that was a long time ago. I carry it as a token of pride, and also to remind me that all conflicts can be ended in a civilized manner. Anyways, allow me to properly introduce myself." Holding out his hand, he gave a slight grin. "Charles Snollyout, Esquire, attorney at law. I'd prefer it if you called me Chuck." Placing my hand in his gloved one, I shook it firmly. What does a lawyer want with me? "Well, upon hearing about your accident, I decided to do a little sniffing and digging. It just didn't make sense that the pier was destroyed from such a minor storm when it survived hurricanes. Do you recall 6 months ago, a period where the pier was shut down for renovations?" "Yes. Why?" "Turns out the company who owns the pier made a snafu. They did not follow proper procedure for maintenance and renovation of the support beams. As such, they are facing serious charges." I looked to Sam, who I knew would have a few choice words about our previous employers. Sure enough, she chimed in. "Let me get this straight. Corporate cut corners, and that's why Ishmael got hurt? That's insane. We can't let them get away with this." "What about Sam? Isn't she able to get a settlement?" Chuck scratched his cheek in consideration. I'm afraid not. According to our reports, at the time of the collapse, she was not on the pier. While I often hesitate to discuss such matters in front of people other than my client, Miss Dinah makes a point. You suffered injuries from your fall, not to mention the emotional damages sustained from panic and fear that were caused by the negligence. This suit will be massive. We're talking hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of dollars in compensation." Sam grasped my arm in excitement, barely able to contain her large smile. Leaning to me, she whispered into my ear, "Ishmael, this is exactly what we needed." I turned back to him. "How much do you charge for your services? Well, I'd love to see corporate get what's coming to them. I'm not sure I can afford a lawyer." "I figured you may say such," he replied, retrieving a piece of paper with what looked like a contract on it. "You will find that everything here is in order. The contract states that in the event of our loss, I will not charge you for my services. If we do win, however, I'll only take 2%, after taxes, of course." Scanning the document, I saw that he was telling the truth. I couldn't help but be suspicious, though. I'd always thought lawyers were supposed to be bloodthirsty sharks. "Why are you helping us?" My office is a lesser-known one. While we've never lost a case thus far, going after such a large corporation would put us on the map, inevitably increasing our client base." Sam's entire body was shaking. She seemed like she'd explode any moment if I didn't agree, so I nodded. "All right, let's do it. Just tell me what I need to do." "First things first, there's some paperwork I need you to fill out at my office." Reaching into his breast pocket, he pulled out his business card, which stated his name and address. "Drop on by later this afternoon, say 5 o'clock. My secretary will be there to greet you. Try not to get lost in the complex. It's quite the labyrinth." Yes, sir," I politely replied. Tipping his hat, he bid us both farewell and left. I closed the door after him before turning back to Sammy, who had the largest grin on her face that I had ever seen. Now, Sammy, don't get too excited about this. We don't even know if we'll win yet. I think we will. That bump on your head is the best thing that's ever happened to us. I'm so happy I can barely even stand it. Rushing to me, she squeezed me hard. I'm coming with you this afternoon. No buts. Okay, okay, I laughed. Fine, you can come with me. After I win that money, we're both getting mansions. Both? I'll save you the money. Just build one and I'll live with you, she teased. Though it was meant to be a joke, I had no doubt that if this did pan out, she'd really agree to it. The smile faded from her face as the weight of everything that was temporarily lifted came crashing down again. Seriously, though, Ishmael, I know I'm asking a lot of you. I mean, if you don't want me to come, don't be ridiculous, Sammy. You're my best friend. You've taken care of me hundreds of times. I'd gladly help, even if you didn't ask. Besides, you're the one who gave me the job on that death trap, so if not for you, the company would have just gotten away with it. Yeah, I suppose so, she agreed before collapsing on the couch. Taking the love seat beside her, I watched as she blew a strand of red hair from her face. 5 cannot come fast enough, she sighed. Time seemed to pass uncomfortably slow as we waited for the meeting time. Sammy was dozing peacefully on my couch, one hand on her stomach, and the other dangling over its edge. For a brief few moments, I watched the rhythmic rising and falling of her chest before I silently stood and covered her with a small blanket. The only reason she was so exhausted was because she'd spent all the time worrying about me. The least I could do was make her comfortable. Her serenity was my serenity. So, why did I feel so uneasy? I couldn't shake the thought that the attack wasn't a dream. I'd had the same nightmare every day for the last week, but when I woke up, I immediately knew it wasn't real. This one, however, stuck with me enough that I wasn't certain. That's when I had an idea. Retreating into my room, I sat in front of the computer and pulled open my internet browser. The name Luska was unfamiliar to me, but if I was right, there would be some evidence online of its existence. That would prove my brain didn't just make it up. According to the online sources, Luska was a cryptid found in the Caribbean, described as a monstrous mix between an octopus and a squid. I flicked through hundreds of images and witness accounts. Some artist renditions depicted it as a weird shark-octopus hybrid, nothing like what I'd seen. Seeking a bit more, however, I found a settler's log from the late 1400s that made my stomach knot. In his journal, he described a massive cross between an octopus and a squid, easily the size of an island that had managed to snatch members of his crew. What frightened me most, however, was the settler's last name, Job. It had to have been a coincidence, right? It still didn't stop it from being creepy. My heart was pounding roughly as I continued to scan the document. Every word was identical to my experience. He even grotesquely described the screams of his men as the monster let them bob back up to the surface before pulling them under again. The worst part, he noted, was that once they were all dead, the creature vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving only behind a mad cackle from under the waves. Ishmael? Sam's drowsy voice called through the door, causing me to jump. Ishmael, are you sleeping in there? It's almost time to go. Coming, I answered shakily, closing out of the tab before opening the door. Sammy smiled at me, still half asleep. Taking a deep breath, I tried to hide my panic by returning her smile. Morning, Sleeping Beauty. You want to stay and nap more? No, no, she replied, waving me off. I'm too excited to sleep. But if it's all the same, I think it'd be better if you drove. I may also be too excited to drive. She punctuated the thought with another wide yawn. You can revel in your excitement in my car, I teased. Just try to stay awake during the meeting. It may be difficult to discuss money over you snoring like a bear. She smacked my arm and trudged after me as I locked up. The sun was already dipping in the sky above us, bathing my car in hues of golden orange. Holding the door open for Sam, she clambered into the passenger seat. She was asleep before she hit the headrest. The dread from the settler's account was still overwhelmingly present in my mind. It was enough that I found it hard to concentrate as my fingers shakily punched my destination into the GPS. As my car rumbled along the road, I gripped the wheel tightly. Snap out of it, Ishmael. It is just a coincidence. Despite repeating it to myself, I still felt anxious. What must it have been like for that explorer? I couldn't imagine having to helplessly watch as some monstrosity slowly killed my friends. My eyes briefly turned to regard the sweetheart beside me. If I were to lose her, it would be devastating. I always knew it would be, in the back of my mind, of course, but the entire incident put it into a new perspective. I swore to myself then I'd do anything to protect her, the same way she'd protected me my entire life. Turning to look forward, my heart jumped into my throat as I quickly swerved to avoid hitting a woman who had been walking in the middle of the road. The sudden jerking movement woke Sam, who let out a cry of surprise. Jesus, Ishmael, what did you do? Sorry, I replied shakily, glancing into the rearview mirror to see the woman watching after us. I was a little distracted. If you were a little uglier, I'd be able to focus on the road. Oh, it's my fault? She ran a hand through her tousled hair before taking deep, calming breaths. Just keep your eyes forward. Are we almost there? My own heart rate started to return to normal. I glanced briefly at the GPS. Should be coming up right here? I brought my car to a halt right outside of a massive building covered in cracked brown plaster and dirty panes of glass. This is Chuck's office? Sam asked skeptically. It looks abandoned. I couldn't help but agree. The derelict complex stood looming over the rest of the rundown area of the city, with no evidence that anyone was inside, much less that they had been in years. Maybe it's under renovations, I tried, even though I knew that was a lie. Call his number, Sammy suggested. Nodding, I typed it into my phone before placing it to my ear. After a brief dial tone, the Irish brogue came through the line. This is Chuck. Hi, Chuck. This is Ishmael Job. Sammy and I are trying to find your office, and I think there was a mistake on your card. There is no mistake, he assured me, his tone cold as ice. I know the building may look ugly from the outside, but as I said, my firm is a very small one. Come on in and talk to the woman at the reception desk. It's down the halls quite a ways, but just follow the path there, and she'll direct you to our offices. Okay, we'll be up in a few minutes. I await you eagerly. The line disconnected immediately after that. Well? Sam asked. This is the place, he says. We're supposed to meet the receptionist, and she'll tell us how to get to his office specifically. As we reached the front, I could barely see through the glass doors. They were so caked with grime. Grasping the handle, it took a hard tug to pull it free, leaving us staring down a long hallway lined with hanging fluorescent bulbs that swayed eerily. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. So, Ishmael, would you care to lead the way down the creepy hallway? Ladies first, I joked nervously. Staring down the corridor, our presence seemed to have kicked up a flurry of dust that now danced in the setting sunbeams. No one had come through here in a long time. Summoning her courage, Sam carefully stepped inside. When a psychotic killer didn't jump out from one of the many doors lining the halls, we let out a collective sigh of relief before beginning our trek inward. This is ridiculous, she grumbled. If this case doesn't pull through, we could always get a job here as a janitor. By the looks of things, they really need one. A light bulb behind us burst into sparks, sending a section of the hall into darkness and causing us to both jump out of our skins. Agreed, an electrician, too. How much further is the desk? Right around this corner, Sam hoped aloud. As it turns out, Chuck wasn't kidding when he said this place was a labyrinth. The sprawling hallways all looked the same, and despite that we hadn't stopped walking for a good 3 minutes, it still felt like we hadn't made any progress. Finally, we reached a lobby-like area. The wide open circular space ascended straight up multiple floors with balconies looking down into it. The skylight ceiling illuminated the room much more naturally than the awful fluorescent lights, but even still the distinct lack of life was unsettling. There's no one here, I noted. Maybe she's on break. Ishmael, I don't like this. Let's go back to the car. We need this money, Sammy, I reminded her. So the building's a little creepy. Don't you think it'd be silly to pass up on a small fortune because we found nothing? Let's look for a directory. I'll check the desk. See if there's one hanging on the walls somewhere. Okay. Walking around the dusty mahogany, I ran my finger along its surface to find it was laid thick. I struggled to believe that someone as tidy as Chuck could possibly walk through here every day. Just as the realization dawned on me that there hadn't been any footprints, Sam called out for my attention. Ishmael, look! She shakily raised her hand, pointing at the floor in front of her. Following her gaze, I changed my mind about staying. On the ground was a massive paw print, as well as deep grooves where the claws would be. The pad alone had to be at least 5 inches square, and the scrapes were so deep they went through the linoleum into the concrete foundation beneath. Let's get out of here, I whispered to her. Definitely. We moved for the hallway we'd come from, only to hear a deep growl behind us. We froze in place. Despite my fear, I turned to see the source of the noise. The thing was absolutely grotesque. A massive dog stood opposite of us, nearly 5 feet tall. Even without its size, this thing was visibly supernatural. Sharp bone spurs jutted from its spine. The entire body looked as if the skin had been stripped from it before being painted a solid black, and its piercing crimson eyes were like smoldering flames. As it let out another guttural snarl, luminous green drool fell from its jagged fangs to sizzle on the ground. One of the worst parts, though, was the stench. It was unbearable, like a mix of sulfur and rotting flesh. Don't make sudden moves, I instructed Sam. When you run from a dog, it'll chase you. We need to back away slowly. The two of us carefully took a step back, but before we could take another, the abomination let out a commanding bark so loud that it shook the very building beneath our feet. As dust rained down on us from the balcony above, Sam looked to me. New plan? She pleaded. I've changed my mind. Run! Grabbing her wrists, I pulled her after me, taking off at full sprint back the way we came. Soon she was running on her own as our footsteps thundered along the tile. I could hear the eager howling of the beast behind us, though when I looked over my shoulder, I couldn't see him. I had no intentions of being this thing's dinner, so I quickly grabbed one of the doors to the side and flung it open in hopes of finding shelter. What greeted me, however, was a bricked-up wall. Oh, crap. Sam, having seen me, pulled open a door on the other side to find the same thing. In a frenzy, we began tearing open door after door, only to find that they had been sealed off. Our time was running out as the dog slowly stalked us through the halls, its heavy footsteps echoing through the entire complex. It wasn't even running after us. It knew we were trapped. The beast could catch us whenever it wanted to. Leave them, Sammy, I shouted, making a break for it. She followed suit, and it was only then that the dog let out an excited bay. The rhythmic pounding of our footsteps was soon overshadowed by the sound of the heavy doors being smashed off their hinges as the monster barreled through them. The exit was too far away. Even if we did somehow manage to get to the car, I was certain this thing could easily flatten it with us inside. Just as my stamina was dwindling, I spotted an open door ahead of us. I prayed that it was another exit. Suddenly, the face of the woman I'd nearly run down on the road peered out to us. Over here, quickly, she instructed. Without a moment's hesitation, I shoved Sam inside before following in after her. The room was barely bigger than a supply closet and had pipes running all along the walls into the floor and ceiling. He's going to find us, I cried. What do we do? Firstly, untwist your knickers and stand absolutely still, the woman answered, reaching up to twist a large wheel on the side of the wall. As water began to rush through the pipes with a loud sloshing, the enormous hound came to stop just outside of the door, crouching low to the ground and coming closer. Even still, she just stood there, hands on her hips and smiling. Hello, she greeted him in her Scottish accent. Was she insane? He leaned forward, opening his maw wide before coming to a sudden stop. Taking a few steps back, he lunged forward before again stopping just short of the woman. What's going on? Sam gasped, clinging to me. Aw, you having a hard time there, pup? The girl cooed before pulling her leg back and lashing outward. Our eyes were as wide as saucers as her snap kick knocked the massive dog upward into the ceiling. As it came crashing down, she followed up with a roundhouse that sent the gigantic beast flying into the far wall. Bits of brick and mortar crumpled to the ground as it shakily got back to its feet. This is none of your business, Slickback, the hellacious beast roared, rushing forward only to again come to a screeching stop, snapping its jaws just in front of her. Sammy, did that dog just speak? Unable to answer, she just nodded her head. We're resorting to name-calling now. Slickback, the mystery woman scoffed. It even sounds gross. What if I started taking to calling you Mudgut? Surrender the humans now, he bellowed in her face, sending flecks of spit towards her, only for them to stop mid-air before falling straight down to the ground below. It was as if an invisible wall had come between us and the monster. Taking off her shoe, she quickly slapped the dog in the nose, causing him to let out a confused yip. Bad dog, she taunted, slipping it back onto her foot. Let me tell you how this is going to play out. You're going to turn around, go back to your master, and tell him that the key is under my protection. Otherwise, I'll make you eat pavement. Got it? You insolent whelp, it growled. I swear I will rip the flesh from your bones and feast upon your entrails. Once I get a hold of you, your screams will be like sweet music too. With a blur of movement, she pivoted on her foot, slamming her heel into his head with a sickening crunch. He spun once in the air, landing finally with a resounding thud and slumped over unconscious. Can't say I didn't try to reason with you, she told the beast before turning back to us. Immediately I moved to stand between Sam and the woman. Who are you? I demanded. Stay away from us. Oi, is that any way to thank someone who just pulled your keister out of the fire? She huffed, putting her hands on her hips. And after you nearly beat me with your car, too. After a tense moment, the smile hadn't faded from her lips. Looking into her face, I tried hard to place it. There was something familiar about her, but I couldn't even begin to come to who she was. Sorry? I tried, unsure of what to say. She shrugged her shoulders apathetically. No harm. Now, you two don't have much time. You need to get to your car quickly before this one wakes up and decides this nap wasn't restful. Go back to your house, Ishmael. It should be safe there. Hold on a moment, Sam snapped, brushing past me. We're not going anywhere until we get some answers, got it? What the heck was that thing? What does it want with us? The woman's smile vanished now that she was addressing Sammy. Listen up, lass. I'll only say it once. You're gonna take your friend, you're gonna leave now. For you wind up panbread, savvy? She growled, her accent growing thicker with her anger. What does that even mean? Oot! She boomed, causing me to quickly grab Sammy and drag her towards the exit before she could further upset the woman who could hit like a freight train. Finally, making our escape out of the haunting labyrinth, we quickly reached the car in a pant. Tires screeching, we pulled from the building faster than we could even think. It wasn't until then that I'd realized I'd never given the woman my name. Chapter 3. As our car rumbled down the road, I continued to try to recall the woman we'd just met. If she knew my name, we'd have to have met before. Hey, Sammy, did you recognize that girl? No. Why? I could tell by the pointed way she spoke that she wasn't sure she wanted to get to know her in the first place. Sammy usually had a difficult time getting along with other girls. She called me Ishmael, but I never told her my name. We must have met somewhere before. You may be thinking too far into it, Sam replied. This hallways did echo quite a bit. Maybe she just heard us talking, and when I said your name, she just made the assumption. Either way, what do you think she meant by she'd find us? Somehow I don't think it's as simple as she overheard my name. How would she even know my house is safe if she didn't know who I was or where I lived? How did she manage to kick a dog the size of a VW bug clear across the room? To be honest, she seemed just as much trouble as the dog was. I'd much rather go home and just forget the entire thing happened. I looked at her like she was crazy. You want me to drop you off at your house? Well, no, of course not. After what happened, I'd much rather stay over at your place. I don't trust the woman, but if we're together, we're more likely to live than if we're alone, right? Her hand reached to mine and squeezed it for comfort. I could tell she was really shaken up by the whole thing. I was too. You don't mind, do you? Of course not. I'd be more comfortable knowing you were safe. I mean, I can't expect a bonehead like you to take care of yourself, now can I? Oh, you're so considerate, she retorted, rolling her eyes. Just be glad I like you, or I'd sock you for that one. Her response brought a smile to my face. It was nice to know she was still the same old Sammy. Still, beneath the humor, there was still the suffocating fear of what we'd faced. What in the world was happening to me? The rest of the car ride was made in silence and caution. Even when we reached the front pathway, we moved into a low crouch. If anyone had been watching, we would look incredibly suspicious, but I preferred that to being ambushed by another monster. As I reached for the doorknob, I froze. My door was slightly ajar. Inside, I could hear the sound of scurrying creatures moving about. Even the TV's channels were changing. Something is inside. Unless hellhounds have tiny fingers on the bottom of their paws, I think it's something different. What is it? I don't know. Cracking the door a little wider, I peered inside to see at least half a dozen animals moving around my house, opening drawers, pulling out trash, even crawling under the furniture. They look like tiny foxes. They're barely the size of kittens. Oh, that sounds adorable. I quickly put my finger to her lips to signal her to be quiet. Sure enough, the sounds had ceased. All of them were standing alertly, their triangular ears perked up and craning to hear any noise. After they were convinced that no one was watching, they continued their rummaging. I think they're looking for something. Okay, here's the plan. We run in, you grab a pillowcase. I'll snag one and toss it to you, and then we'll keep it in there and interrogate it. Got it? What makes you think they can talk? She whispered. I shrugged. The Hellhound did. This can't just be a coincidence. Sam surrendered the point and waited for my countdown. Holding up my fingers, I counted down from 3 until finally I burst open the door, causing them all to look up in shock. Immediately, they began to scatter, some of them even popping into nothingness as Sam made a mad dash for my room. Grabbing one of the slower ones, I scooped it up and hurled it down the hallway. It vanished midair, but still something landed into the pillowcase that Sam held open. Holding the opening closed, we could see the shape writhing about inside it, but when I turned back, the rest had disappeared. Ishmael! Sam cried, holding the creature at arm's length as it hissed and yowled from inside of the bag. Before I could take it from her, she spun and smacked it against the wall with a thud, causing it to fall still. God, Sam, did you just kill it? No, I mean, I don't think so. I panicked. Snatching the bag from her, I nudged the shape with my finger. Hey, you in there. Are you all right? A high-pitched groan came from the pillowcase. It was alive. Why would you do that? It almost sounded like it was crying. A wave of guilt washed over me before I reminded myself that the last talking animal I encountered tried to kill me. Listen up. We have questions for you, and we want answers. Understand? You won't hit me again, will you? The creature squeaked. Only if you refuse to talk, Sammy jumped in. Okay, I'll talk, but could you please let me out of the bag? It's hard to breathe. Sam and I exchanged nervous glances. The last thing we wanted was for it to escape. I motioned towards the bathroom before shutting and locking my front door. Sammy grabbed a kitchen knife, just in case it tried to attack while it was quarantined. When we were sure it was secured, I sat with my legs crossed, placing the sack carefully on the ground. A pointed snout soon emerged behind wide yellow eyes. Noting it wasn't able to escape, it crawled out and sat on its haunches, grooming its paw. Okay, you're out of the bag. Now answer our question. Who are you, and what are you doing here? The creature tilted its head inquisitively before a strange grin seemed to cross its face. Flopping over onto its back cutely, its tail swished beneath it. Looking for you, master, it purred playfully. Oh, I'm sure. Clearly you'd be able to find me in my cabinets and drawers. Don't lie to us or I'll throw you back in the sack. Would you really be so mean to something as cute as me, master? It asked, rolling back over to nuzzle its cheek against my knee. Sam picked it up by the scruff of its neck. Call him master again and find out. To make her point, she held the kitchen knife an inch from its face. Okay, it whimpered. I'm sorry. We're looking for a key. A key? Ishmael, that girl mentioned a key too. She said that Black Dog was looking for it too. I bet this little jerk is working for them. Working for a hellhound? Ew, never. I nodded for Sammy to set the creature back down. The moment it touched the ground, the creature ran back to me to curl up in my lap. Why do you say that? Hellhounds are disgusting. They're always drooling and making loud noises, and when they eat, their food goes everywhere but in their mouths. It stuck out its tongue and made a gagging sound. And they stink. What about Chuck? I demanded. Do you work for him? No, I don't work for Chuck. He's just as bad as hellhounds. So, what are you? Sammy asked, inspecting the creature curiously. I mean, you look like a fox, but you're a lot smaller than a fox should be. My name is Hikaru, it stated, clearly displeased with the way Sam had phrased her question. You're a yokai, I realized. Sam looked at me in confusion. A what? A yokai. They're monsters from Japanese folklore, I explained, putting air quotes around monsters. Sometimes they can be really scary, other times they're just annoying. And at other times we're adorable. Especially we Yako. Hikaru chimed in, rolling over onto its back again. Without even thinking, I reached down to scratch its stomach, causing it to wiggle happily. When I realized what I was doing, I quickly pulled away. I wasn't too familiar with the lore for a Yako, so on the safe side, it was best I didn't touch it too much. Many yokai could possess humans, according to legend. Hikaru gave an irritated whine as I looked to Sam. So, another cryptid looking for a key. It's probably best if we find it first. Okay, Hikaru, you're free to go, but you'd better keep away from us, got it? No, I want to stay with you, Mass. It stopped mid-sentence as it shot a cautious glance to the metal blade in Sam's hand. I can be useful, honest. Ishmael, we need to be careful about this, Sammy advised. These things are supposed to be pretty slippery, right? What's to stop it from betraying us? She had a point, but just before I spoke, it chimed in. Lots of yokai are honor-bound to those we owe a debt to. Since you offered to spare me, I pledged myself to you. Now you know you can trust me. Looked at Sam. Japanese culture is pretty big on honor. I say we bring Hikaru along. Better to keep an eye on a friend who's possibly an enemy than to let an enemy who's possibly a friend leave. After a moment of attempting to formulate an argument, she gave a sigh of surrender before nodding. Fine. If you're sure, then I defer to your expertise. This really isn't something I know much about. Don't worry about it, Sammy. I'll grab you a book if you like. One that has pretty pictures so you won't have to read so much. I think I have a copy of Cryptids for Dummies lying around somewhere. In response, she just stuck out her tongue. That was when a loud thud came from the front door, followed by the sound of something crashing. Immediately our eyes met, and we both knew the sound meant trouble. We have to get out of here, Sam said. I concurred. Grasping the doorknob, I cracked the door and peered out. As my eyes fell upon the figure who was now trashing my apartment, I gasped in disbelief. After I closed the door again, she crawled over to me. What? What did you see? It took all I had to not laugh out of sheer shock for our situation. Would you believe me if I said Bigfoot? Standing in the high-rise across from the warehouse he'd set his trap in, Chuck sighed, dropping 2 effervescent tablets into a glass of water. So, let me get this straight, he grumbled to the hellhound who now stood nervously in front of his desk. I delivered you the 2 humans on a platter. Not only were they there, with absolutely no way to defend themselves, they were far enough from the exit that it was impossible for them to outrun you. Yet, somehow, despite all odds, fate conspired against you just enough to let them slip through your incapable paws. Have I missed anything? It wasn't my fault, boss. A slick back showed up and protected them. I couldn't get to them if I wanted to, honest. The hound's voice trembled with fear as Chuck lifted the glass to his lips and sipped from it. And tell me, how did the slickback do that, She cut me off. The large black dog grumbled, averting his eyes from the gentlemanly commander. She turned on a subterranean pipe so I couldn't cross, then she knocked me out. Knocked you out! He roared before taking a deep breath and straightening his tie to calm himself. Drinking more of the fizzy liquid, he couldn't believe the splitting headache he was getting from his underling's incompetence. At least tell me you've tracked down their scent, he said impatiently. No, sir. When I awoke, the scent was gone. The slickback must have gotten rid of the scent somehow. With a snarl, Chuck's muscles rippled beneath his suit, expanding outward until the seams struggled to contain him. The threads soon burst apart, revealing a body covered in midnight black hair. After a sickening crunch, his legs reversed direction, sending him onto all fours. Faster than one could blink, the former lawyer now had the appearance of a not-so-formal hound, save the eye patch that still rested on his face. Ducking low to the ground, a growl emitted from his throat just before he lunged at the hellhound, sinking his fangs into his neck. With just a flick of his mighty head, he tore into his throat, his maw flooding with the warm sensation of blood. Dropping the corpse, he transformed back into his human form, dabbing the blood from his cheeks with a handkerchief that he kept in his desk. He so despised it when he destroyed his suits, but he needed to make an example. Summoning forth 2 more hellhounds, he pointed at the body. Dump him with the rest of the garbage. You know the spot. As they dragged the failure away, Chuck smirked. He knew that the fear would keep them in line from now on. They would not fail again. Alright, guys, it is currently 2:49. We are on Chapter 4 now. I think now is a good time to call it quits. Leave you guys kind of wanting more. Starting tomorrow, maybe I'll read a little bit more. I hope that those of you who are watching have enjoyed it, and I will continue to try to get better at my Irish and Scottish accents. They'll be coming up a little bit more. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, both to the temporary Minecraft one and this reading that I've just done. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that I will see you guys again tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night.